What's up, art boys? It's your boy Eric, aka at the Beef Dev, back at it again with another YouTube video. Alright, last week I showed y'all how I make tiling textures in ZBrush. Those textures were for a mod kit I'm currently working on. This week I've been demodding my base mod kit to start setting up the houses for the village mod kit and make them game ready. And to that end, I ended up making a little door that's gonna be like just a plain texture for the houses. Now I realize that some of those terms might be a little confusing, so I'll explain a bit. First off, mod kit. What's a mod kit? A mod kit is akin to creating Lego pieces for buildings and environments so that level designers can make whatever buildings they need to for gameplay purposes. So a good mod kit has a decent amount of pieces that provides flexibility as well as versatility as far as making buildings as tall, short, damaged, or with as many entryways as they need. It's important for the tools one uses like in game making to be flexible because oftentimes the end product is only somewhat reminiscent of the beginning idea. Alright, so now onto the second term, demodding. What does that mean? Well, using the Lego example once again, think of taking the building you've made earlier and gluing all the pieces together so that all the parts stay consistent and it's finalized. This is done in large part to help a game engine performance, so it has to render less vertices because it's just, instead of being like, I don't know, let's say 20 vertices per wall, it's only 4 or 5. So I guess getting those two terms out of the way, let me talk a little bit about my process here. So as you've been seeing, I'm just making this sort of old school medieval type door. And when making hard surface objects in general, I like to start using something like 3ds Max, Maya, or Blender to get a solid foundation of the shapes and silhouettes I'm going to be making. I think that's by far one of the most important things as far as like the foundation of what you're making, because if the foundation is rickety, the rest of the art's going to be really sketchy. So as far as why this model exists, it's mainly so I get the shape across that I need so I can add all the high detail in ZBrush. I do it here because I'm way faster in 3ds Max, although realistically you could do it just straight in ZBrush or any other type of modeling software. Here you can see me kind of fidgeting with different shapes and different sort of forms and those type of things. And like I said in the last video, a lot of this for me is just experimenting and finding what works out, finding what doesn't, finding what looks good, and finding something that I'm happy with. So you're gonna see throughout this whole video, a lot of it is just experimenting back and forth and then just deciding not to go one direction or forego that direction to go a different direction. And I think that's just part of the creative process that helps me. But I know for some people it's really helpful to have like a really detailed sort of list or like action plan to take with very little deviation. But from my personal experience as to how iterative game design is, it's better to just kind of go with a thing. As soon as it doesn't work, just cut it out, forget about it, and then try something else that might work better. Towards the end of this first part in 3ds Max, I start adding the modifier Turbo Smooth so I can add a whole bunch more geometry. Typically it just smooths things out, but the way that I like to operate it is changing the smoothing to smoothing by groups rather than geometry, so I can have these nice hard edges just by doing the edge groups. And the reason why I do this is because it's way easier if you have more poly to add a little bit extra in ZBrush so you can do the high detail rather than just going in like this, because if you go in like without the modifier, some of these shapes may have too many facety type hard edges, and that's the last thing you want in a round object. Like one of my professors always said, if it's round, it's round, so it needs as many edges as it needs. Awesome. So now we're on the ZBrush part, the part that I always say it's the funnest part. So here you can see, like in the last video, I just go to preferences to try and save up on memory a little bit by skipping autosave. Then I use the Dynamesh modifier to add more geometry, but so it still retains that shape. Because if you just subdivide, then it has the same effect as Turbo Smooth, where it adds more polygons based on the geometry itself, which it can be good depending on what you need it for, but for these purposes I don't need that. Okay, so as you can see, the process is fairly straightforward for what I'm doing right now. I'm just making like the grain of the wood and adding that like high type of detail. Originally I was gonna have really banged up wood planks, but after looking at a lot of reference, doors, they tend to not get banged up as much. Maybe sometimes in the corners if they're relatively old, but from what I've been able to see, when there's like these old medieval sort of hardwoods, it takes a lot of like damage and a lot of abuse for them to get as banged up as I was thinking. And a lot of this is just kind of seeing patterns that I liked and developing them like way before in some of the textures that I made, and then just staying consistent to those wood patterns and adding them wherever there's wood. The rest of the process here is pretty simple. It's just, you know, carving the things using the chisel brush, eventually bring in all the details like the rivets for the metal hinges, I guess that would be called. And I like to use the planer brush to kind of give it that hammered steel look. And occasionally I'm going to be adding height maps from other projects that I've done before, where you get those nice valleys and I guess high points that one would have when you're hammering like metal pretty roughly. So I add those more towards the end of the process in ZBrush. Alright, so now we're moving on from ZBrush to Substance. So in between these two steps, there's usually making a gamer's model that has a lot less topology, geometry, not topology. Um, and the whole purpose is that is so you can project all the detail that you sculpted into the lower geometry model, so that it's again more friendly for the performance of the game engine. Unfortunately, though, I thought I was recording, but I just wasn't. I think I may have hit the stream button in OBS by accident, but my stream thing isn't even set up, so nothing was captured. But anyway, here, as you saw in the other video where I talked about it briefly, I've made a couple of smart materials that are just generators with grunge passes and edge highlights and those type of things to add different variants to the texture itself. So I start with wood. And because I have it set up for this project, it's very easy for me to just change very minor sliders, and then I'm happy with the wood result. And as you may see, it looks kind of weird that even the metal parts are all full of wood, and that's because I'm going to go up in another layer and start messing around with the metal materials, modifying them, adding masks so that only the parts that are metal or that are supposed to be metal are metal, and the parts that are wood stay wood. Since overall I'm doing this like stylized, Fortnite-ish inspired textures, I'm also basing some of these textures techniques based on other things that I do, right? And it's very helpful to incorporate things that you do in other facets of your life into your art. It gives it more depth. So what I'm doing here that incorporates something else is the type of edge highlighting that I'm doing using metalware. It's very similar to the edge highlighting that one would do when doing painting miniatures, like the Warhammer or any other sort of miniature really. So I try to take some of those ideas and apply them here digitally. They don't always come across 100% how it would if one would were to paint this by hand with a brush. But it helps having those type of little nuggets of, I guess, information and past experiences so you can apply them as you see fit here. So all this being for a mod kit that I plan on, I guess, testing in Unreal. A good thing to do is to, once you got all your textures done, to just take them into Unreal and see how they look. At the beginning, when I'm starting up this Unreal thing, you're gonna see a whole bunch of like flat textures, and you're gonna see me turn off the sRGB little checkbox. I'm not 100% sure what that does, but I do know that it makes my textures look closer to what they were intended to look, like from substance. Like I said in the other video, the rendering is very different in all across the engines and programs you use. So that's a little trick that I found that helps me. It doesn't always work, because a lot of times when you have post-processing, that's a whole other world of things to do. As far as the material setup, it's very simple, right? I'm just connecting the base color to base color, metallic to the metallic, normals to normals, and roughness to roughness. I used to do ambient occlusion as well, but I kind of, I was reading some of the documentation in Unreal, and a lot of it seems like the engine kind of does it for you. So if you want extra dark shadows, then by all means go ahead and do that. If not, I tend to not use them for the most part. Later on in here, I'm not sure if it's this part or the next one, but you can see that I'm selecting all the door meshes that I have on the little, I guess, cabin things, and then just clicking and dragging my material over it. But because once you have that set up, then it's super easy to populate the rest of your scene. And in fact, I go and test it, because this is supposed to be like third person-ish, so I have a third person template. You're gonna see like the old rock texture that's, I think, still needs some tweaking, but it's looking pretty good so far. Yeah, so that's just the main point of testing these things in Unreal, because sometimes you can catch things you didn't catch when you were modeling or when you were texturing. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to be showing the whole door and the frame thing just by itself, so you kind of get a better sense of how it looks with all the normals baked in, the textures, all the edge highlighting done, and all those cool things. Alright, so that was me taking you guys through the whole process that I take to make hard surface objects, specifically this tiny door. Oh, tiny relatively to other doors that I have planned on making. Not sure if I'll be recording those, but if I do, then it's probably gonna be called little door and the other one big door. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, like sure to like it. If you dislike it, dislike it. And if you have any questions, be it technical or otherwise, if you feel free to just type them in the comments, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. Well, have a good one.